It's somewhere around 450 BC, give or take a few decades. Timekeeping is a little vague when most people are still measuring the day by the position of the sun and how loudly the goats are complaining. You're in the world of ancient Greece, a place where marble temples gleam in the heat, olives glisten in shallow bowls, and the line between history and myth is thinner than a well-used tunic. This is an age of heroes, or at least that's how the poets would have you believe. They'll sing about the victories, the gods' favor, the grand feasts after battle. What they won't mention quite so often are the sore feet, the awkward family curses, and the fact that heroic destiny often involves a lot of unpaid manual labor. Tonight we're slipping, very quietly, so as not to wake any easily offended deities into that world. We'll start with the gritty truth of heroic life, then wander into the overbooked schedule of Heracles, pause in the hushed air of the oracle at Delphi, and end the evening reclining in a wealthy Athenian's home, nodding politely through philosophical arguments while trying to look like you've understood any of it. So settle in, no sword fights, no sea monsters, no impossible labors. Not for you anyway, you've survived enough of the day already. The trouble with being an ancient Greek hero, aside from the constant risk of being turned into a constellation without warning, is that most of your days are far less glamorous than the pottery paintings make them look. Those crisp, idealized figures etched in terracotta, they never show the morning routine. First, you wake up on a bed that is, in theory, made of woven reeds and stuffed wool, but in practice feels like it's mostly lumps and the occasional splinter. The air is cool, not brisk enough to be refreshing, but just cold enough that you briefly consider staying under the blanket until the gods get bored and pick a different champion. Unfortunately, the gods are not known for patience. There's training to do, because the bards don't compose songs about people who slept in. You start with running, which the trainers assure you builds character, though it also builds a remarkable ability to resent hills. The sandals dig into the same spot on your heel as yesterday, and the day before that, and the leather straps creak with each step like they, too, are questioning your life choices. Then there's weapons practice. You'd think swinging a sword or hefting a spear would be thrilling. But after the first half hour, it's mostly just sweat in your eyes, and the realization that your opponent, who may be a friend, cousin, or an unfortunate neighbor who drew the short straw, has also skipped breakfast and is taking out their hunger on you. The clanging of metal echoes in your head long after the bout ends. By midday, you're meant to be ready for heroic service, which can mean anything from chasing off a particularly bold goat from someone's vegetable patch to embarking on an urgent quest that turns out to involve walking to the next city to collect a jar of olive oil. You do not get to say no, tuao. This is the part they never tell you, that being a hero often means doing the sort of errands that make you wonder whether the gods have a very dry sense of humor. And while poets like to mention the occasional bag of gold or shining armor as a reward, they're oddly quiet about the many times you're paid in a heartfelt thank you and a basket of figs. Lovely figs, yes, but figs do not pay for new sandals. The truth is, the glory is there, just scattered thinly between long stretches of sweat, dust, and slightly suspicious-smelling travel cloaks. And by the time the day begins to fade, you've probably completed far more chores than quests. But you keep going. Not because you love it, necessarily, but because somewhere, a poet will turn one single shining moment into an eternal verse, and will quietly edit out the part about the goat. By the afternoon, the sun is high enough to make even the most heroic ambitions feel negotiable. The light bounces off the whitewashed walls of the town, the stone streets radiating heat upward until the air shimmers faintly. You, the so-called hero, are trudging toward yet another errand disguised as destiny. The messenger who delivered the task, a wiry teenager who ran barefoot through the dust, claimed it was urgent. That is the word they always use. Urgent could mean a monstrous threat to the city, or, more likely, an elderly noblewoman has misplaced her favorite amphora and insists it must be found before dinner. Today, it is the latter. The amphora, you are assured, is painted with scenes of Perseus and the Gorgon, and she is distraught without it. You make your way through the marketplace, weaving between stalls of figs, dates and jugs of olive oil that gleam in the sunlight. A fishmonger shouts about the freshness of his catch, which smells precisely as you expect a fish left in the midday heat to smell. Children dart between your legs as they chase one another, pretending to be warriors or gods, their wooden swords tapping against your shin, as if to remind you of your own far heavier blade. When you arrive at the noblewoman's home, you're greeted not with awe or applause, but with a long list of where she has already looked for the amphora: the kitchen, the courtyard, under the couch, behind the couch, and once again under the couch, just in case it had crept back. You spend the better part of an hour lifting cushions, checking shelves, and peering into dusty corners, until finally the amphora is found exactly where you expected, on a shelf in the courtyard, sitting in plain view, looking smug for a piece of pottery. The noblewoman thanks you profusely, offers you 2 small honeycakes, and sends you on your way, and that, you suspect, is the end of your urgent quest for the day. By now your legs ache in that dull, reliable way that says you've walked more than you've fought. Your tunic clings to your back. You stop by a public fountain to splash your face, the cool water a small relief from the heat, and watch as the sunlight turns the ripples into a moving pattern on the stone walls. Somewhere, far away, there may be a poet already sharpening his stylus, ready to immortalize the day the hero retrieved the sacred vessel. The amphora will no doubt be upgraded in the tale. Perhaps it will be said to have contained the tears of a goddess, or the wine of Dionysus himself. In the end, the truth will be lost and your role will be polished into something gleaming and noble. But you know better. You'll eat the honeycakes, drink some water, and prepare yourself for whatever urgent summons arrives tomorrow. By the time the sun begins its slow slide toward the horizon, you've abandoned any thoughts of doing anything heroic before tomorrow. The air cools slightly, the harsh midday light softening into long golden shadows that stretch across the uneven stone streets. You head back toward your lodging, which, as heroic residences go, is less marble villa, and more room with a view of someone else's goats. The walls are plastered, a little uneven, with faint traces of old murals that have long since faded into abstract shapes. Your bed waits in the corner, looking no more inviting than it did this morning, but at least you know it's yours. Before settling in, you wander outside again to sit on the low step by the doorway. A neighbor's cat slinks past, tail flicking, glancing at you as if weighing whether you might have any food. You don't, not for cats anyway, but the cat sits anyway, as though your presence alone is a reasonable form of entertainment. Somewhere in the distance the blacksmith's hammer still rings out, slow and steady, like the last heartbeat of the day. The scent of roasting chickpeas drifts from a nearby house, mingling with the sharper tang of freshly crushed olives from the press. The street is quieter now, only the occasional clatter of sandals against stone as someone hurries home before full dark. It's in moments like these that the life of a hero feels oddly ordinary. There are no monsters here, no riddles from mysterious strangers, no dramatic calls to arms. Just the hum of a city settling into night, and the slow cooling of stone beneath you. When you finally go inside, the last light of the day spills through the small window, catching on the wooden handle of your spear propped in the corner. Tomorrow it might be called upon for something grand, or more likely to scare off a particularly persistent goat. You never know. For now, though, there is nothing left to do but lie back, listen to the quiet, and let the day's dust and noise fade away into stillness. The thing about heroism is that it doesn't keep regular hours. You'd think it might, perhaps a neat schedule where you save a village on Mondays, defeat a monster on Wednesdays, and spend the weekend reclining with wine and flattery. Unfortunately, the gods and the people of Greece operate on a far less predictable timetable. This morning begins with the sort of summons that makes your stomach sink, a sharp knock on the door just after sunrise. Outside stands a man wearing the expression of someone who is about to say, "I'm terribly sorry, but..." He explains in hurried tones that there has been a grave matter in the lower part of the city. You picture the usual suspects: sea serpent in the harbor, giant boar in the grain stores, but no. It's a sheep. A single sheep. Missing. And, naturally, you are the only one considered worthy enough to track it down. The path to heroism today winds through narrow streets already stirring with life. Bakers pull fresh bread from clay ovens, the air warm with the scent of barley and sesame. A potter turns his wheel, shaping the wet clay with practiced hands. None of them look at you and think, "There goes a hero." More likely, they're wondering if you're here to buy something, or if you'll block the road with your unnecessarily large shield again. The shepherd meets you at the edge of a small field, his arms flailing as he describes the sheep in question. "White," he says, "with a black ear." You resist the urge to point out that this description fits roughly half the sheep in Greece. You begin the hunt, which is less hunting and more strolling through overgrown paths while being followed by an increasingly skeptical goat. You find the missing sheep, not in some remote dangerous location, but in the middle of a market stall, contentedly chewing on a bundle of leeks. The stall owner is irate, the sheep is entirely unbothered, and you are left wondering how exactly this task differs from what a child with a firm voice could have accomplished. Still, you walk the sheep back, the shepherd grateful beyond reason, pressing a small jar of olives into your hands as thanks. And that's the first great deed of the day complete. One sheep returned, no monsters slain. No poets will write about it, though if they did, you're certain the sheep would be described as ferocious. By the time you head home, the sun is higher, the streets busier, and the reality of heroism feels even further from the marble pedestal, where the storytellers like to place it. Returning home with your jar of olives, you're greeted by the familiar creak of your door, a sound that suggests the hinges have been plotting your demise for months. You place the jar carefully on the shelf, right next to the basket of figs from last week's urgent errand, and sit for a moment on the edge of your bed. It is barely mid-morning, yet you already feel as if you've completed an entire day's worth of nothing in particular. You're halfway through wondering whether you could, in good conscience, take a nap when another knock comes. This time, it's a young woman from the market, her eyes wide, with the kind of urgency that only comes from someone who has been told to fetch help immediately. You steel yourself for another lost animal. Instead, she announces that an amphora of wine has been spilled in the agora, and the merchant responsible insists that a hero must be present to oversee the cleanup, for the dignity of the goods, whatever that means. You arrive to find a large, sticky puddle, slowly working its way toward a drain, the air heavy with the sweet, slightly sour smell of fermenting grapes. A small crowd has gathered, watching with the sort of detached interest people reserve for situations that don't involve them personally. The merchant is wringing his hands, muttering about omens and the displeasure of Dionysus. It takes all of 5 minutes to determine that this is not a divine omen, merely the result of a rope slipping at the wrong moment. Still, the merchant insists you stand nearby, as if your presence alone might persuade the wine not to escape further. So you do, leaning against a column, watching as apprentices with rags and buckets slowly reduce the puddle to a faint purple stain on the stones. When it's over, the merchant thanks you profusely, slipping a small bundle into your hand. Inside is a wedge of cheese wrapped in leaves, the sort of gift that is both thoughtful and perishable. You nod, say something suitably noble about the peace of the city, and walk away. As you head back through the narrow lanes, a group of children runs past, laughing, one of them calling out, "Hero!" in your direction. You can't tell if it's meant sincerely or if they've learned the art of mockery young. Either way, you return home, cheese in hand, olives on the shelf, and the distinct feeling that if the gods are watching, they are thoroughly entertained. The sun is beginning its slow descent when you finally feel the day might release you from duty. The light has turned warmer, richer, washing the city in shades of amber and deep gold. You step outside, carrying the cheese, because leaving it in your room with the summer heat is a quick way to invite all manner of unwanted visitors. You make your way to a friend's small courtyard, thinking you might trade the cheese for bread and call it an evening. He's sitting on a low stool, mending a fishing net, the fine strands catching the sunlight like a web. You share the cheese. He produces a small loaf still warm from his wife's oven. It's not a feast, but it's enough to quiet the stomach and make you feel, for a brief moment, entirely satisfied with the world. Of course, peace never lasts long in a hero's day. As you leave, an elderly neighbor hurries toward you, holding what appears to be a broken wooden stool. She explains with great emphasis that it collapsed while she was sitting on it, which she takes as a sign that someone has cursed her. She would like you to remove the curse, which you suspect means, fix the stool. You carry it back to your lodging, sit cross-legged on the floor, and examine the damage. It is, unsurprisingly, just a loose peg. You push it back into place with a stone, testing it until it holds firm. When you return the stool, the neighbor beams, declaring you have driven away the evil. You nod solemnly, because sometimes letting people believe in small miracles is easier than explaining carpentry. Back at your own door, the street is quiet. The air smells faintly of smoke from cooking fires, and the first stars are pricking their way into the sky. You lean your spear in the corner, stretch out on the bed, and let the stillness settle over you. Somewhere in the city, a poet might already be crafting a verse about today's heroic deeds. If so, you hope they at least give the sheep and the stool a dramatic flourish. The day ends not with triumph, nor with fanfare, but with the kind of quiet that slips in unnoticed, and stays if you let it. If there's one thing you've learned, it's that a hero's life is never without purpose, though the purpose is often baffling. Today begins not with a summons at the door, but with a polite tap on the window shutter. It's a farmer from the outskirts, speaking in the careful tone reserved for approaching both gods and very tired people. He explains that his prize rooster has escaped, and is now terrorizing the rest of his yard. You're fairly certain this does not qualify as terror in the epic sense, but you nod as if accepting a sacred duty. The farmer leads you through winding lanes, past gardens heavy with figs and vines thick with grapes, until you reach a low sun-baked house surrounded by the soft clucking of hens, and one rooster, strutting about with the self-importance of a minor warlord. The bird is large, with glossy feathers and a sharp beak that catches the morning light. It glares at you with the same disdain you've seen from rival warriors. The farmer suggests you approach calmly, which is advice given most often by people who will be watching from a safe distance. You step forward slowly, speaking in the sort of soothing voice one might use for a skittish horse, or a mildly offended deity. The rooster considers you, tilts its head, and then, without warning, charges. You sidestep, narrowly avoiding a beak to the ankle, and begin a slow, deliberate game of pursuit around the yard. Dust rises with each step. The hens, wisely, keep to the edges, murmuring among themselves like gossiping neighbors. After a few circuits, you manage to coax the rooster toward the coop with a trail of scattered grain. It struts inside as though this had been its idea all along, leaving you to close the door quietly behind it. The farmer is effusive with gratitude, pressing a handful of dried figs into your palm as payment. You resist the urge to point out that the rooster will almost certainly escape again within a week. By the time you head back toward the city, the sun is higher, the streets filling with the sounds of commerce and conversation. You walk on, figs in hand, thinking that this, perhaps more than slaying monsters, is what keeps a city running. Not that the poets will ever say so. The rooster incident behind you, you wander deeper into the city, the morning light already giving way to a warmer, lazier midday glow. The figs, sweet and dense, make for an impromptu breakfast as you pass stalls selling fresh bread, clay oil lamps, and small jars of honey, whose amber contents catch the sun like liquid gold. You stop for a moment in the agora, leaning against a column and watching the ebb and flow of the crowd. A group of philosophers is gathered under a patch of shade, voices low and thoughtful. You can't hear exactly what they're discussing, only snippets about the nature of virtue and the impermanence of mortal ambition. It occurs to you that neither of these topics will help anyone catch a runaway rooster. Your idle observation is interrupted by a potter's apprentice, panting from a short run. He blurts out that his master's kiln door is stuck, and they can't pry it open. Would you, a hero, lend your strength? There's no mention of danger, no sense of urgency in the life or death sense. Just the quiet panic of someone whose master will be displeased if today's batch of amphorae is ruined. The kiln sits at the edge of a courtyard, warm air shimmering above its dome. The potter himself, a wiry man with streaks of clay on his arms, explains that the door has jammed halfway. You squat down, inspect the mechanism, really just a stone slab on a pivot, and give it a firm shove. It moves with a grating sound, releasing a puff of hot, dry air that smells faintly of baked earth. Inside, rows of cooling amphorae sit in neat formation, their red surfaces glowing softly. The potter nods in thanks, clearly relieved, and offers you a small cup of water from a jug. It's cool and faintly mineral, and you drink it in slow, grateful sips. When you leave, he calls after you, "You've done us a great service." You suspect great service might be overstating it, but you accept the compliment without correction. The rest of the afternoon stretches ahead like an open road, quiet, sunlit, and full of the possibility that nothing more will be asked of you. Which of course is exactly when someone calls your name from across the street. The voice calling your name belongs to a merchant you've seen before, a man whose stall is always stacked high with bolts of linen in shades ranging from sun-bleached white to deep indigo. He waves you over with the urgency of someone about to describe a terrible calamity. You approach, half expecting to hear about a theft or a dispute. Instead, he explains that a delivery of cloth has arrived, tangled into an unmanageable knot, and his assistants are too busy with customers to fix it. He adds, in a tone that suggests this should appeal to you, that the linen is very fine, worthy of a hero's hands. The bundle sits in the shade of the stall, a confused, crumpled heap of fabric that looks as though it has been used for a wrestling match. You kneel beside it and begin the slow work of untangling each fold, careful not to snag the threads. The process is quiet, methodical, almost meditative. The bustle of the market fades to a background hum, punctuated by the occasional call of a seller or the clink of coins changing hands. Eventually, the linen lies in a neat stack, smooth and orderly. The merchant is delighted, pressing a strip of cloth into your hands as thanks for binding a spear handle or wrapping a wound, he says. You nod, though you suspect it will end up as a headband to keep the sweat from your eyes during training. With the sun now sinking low, you make your way back through the narrow streets. The light has shifted to that gentle honeyed glow that turns every wall and doorway into a painting. Neighbors sit outside their homes, speaking in low voices, the day's work behind them. Somewhere, a flute plays a soft, winding melody. When you reach your door, you pause. Today's heroics have included a rooster, a kiln, and a heap of tangled linen. Hardly the stuff of legend. Yet there's a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the city runs, in part, on small acts no one will ever carve into marble. Inside, you lay down the strip of linen, the figs, and what remains of the cheese from yesterday. Outside, the last traces of sunlight slip away, and the first stars take their place. The world narrows to the stillness of your room and the slow pull of rest. T is the year 470 BC, and the sun is only just breaking over the hills when word arrives: Heracles is in the region. The name alone carries weight, the kind that makes farmers stop mid-scythe, and fishmongers pause in gutting their catch. Everyone knows the stories: the lion, the hydra, the golden apples. What fewer people know is that much of his work involves long walks, heavy lifting, and an impressive tolerance for boredom. You're not here to watch a grand battle. You're here because Heracles has asked for, quote, a pair of steady hands, to help with what he calls the first part of a small task. That phrase, you will soon learn, is hero speak for several hours of drudgery. Today's labor, one of the less glamorous, involves clearing an abandoned pasture of overgrowth before he can track the wild mares of Diomedes said to graze nearby. The pasture lies just beyond the outskirts, where the land slopes gently toward the sea, and the air is thick with the resinous scent of pine. The grass has grown tall, dry stalks bending in the breeze, their tips whispering together like a crowd sharing secrets. Heracles works in broad, efficient sweeps, cutting down brambles with a curved blade as though they are made of straw. You take a slower approach, pulling weeds at their roots, rolling stones aside so the path can be walked without a twisted ankle. Occasionally he pauses to drink from a water skin, passing it to you without ceremony. His manner is calm, almost methodical, as if this were just another day's work, which for him it is. By midday the pasture is a patchwork of cleared space, sunlight falling evenly over bare earth. The work is unremarkable but strangely satisfying. Heracles surveys the space, nodding once in approval. Good, he says. Now the real work can begin. You resist the urge to ask if real work means anything other than more walking, lifting, or wrestling something larger than you. For now the sound of the sea drifts faintly over the fields, and the day is still. The real work, as it turns out, is not a pitched battle with the mares, nor a heroic chase across the plains. It is walking. A great deal of walking. Heracles moves with the steady, deliberate pace of a man who has learned not to tire himself out too early. You follow at a respectful distance, the two of you tracing the boundary of the now cleared pasture to look for signs of the animals. Every so often he stops, crouches, and points to something on the ground, a faint indentation in the dirt, a scatter of trampled grass, a single hoofprint half filled with dust. He examines each one with the same seriousness another man might reserve for reading an oracle. The air grows warmer, and the light turns that pale, flattened gold that signals early afternoon. Cicadas have taken up their monotonous chorus, their rise and fall blending with the crunch of dry earth under your sandals. At one point, Heracles asks you to gather some fallen branches for later. You collect them into a tidy bundle, unsure whether later means firewood, a barricade, or some impromptu trap. He doesn't explain, and you don't press, partly because his silences seem deliberate, and partly because you know the answer will probably be anticlimactic. The walk stretches on, slow and repetitive, with no mares in sight. You begin to wonder if the true labor here is enduring the sameness of each step, without drifting into daydream. Eventually Heracles calls a halt under the shade of a broad olive tree. He sits, unfastens a cloth-wrapped bundle, and offers you half a round of bread and a wedge of cheese. The bread is dense, the cheese faintly sharp, and both taste better than they have any right to after so much wandering. The shade holds you both for a while, the quiet broken only by the faint slap of waves far in the distance. Heracles stretches out his legs, closes his eyes briefly, and says, "We'll move again when the light changes." Which, given the slow crawl of the sun overhead, will not be any time soon. The light shifts almost imperceptibly, a slightly longer shadow here, a warmer hue there, before Heracles finally rises. You follow him back along a winding path that skirts the edge of the pasture, the sea now a pale strip in the distance. The air has cooled enough that each breath feels easier, though the cicadas continue without pause, as if unaware of any change in the hour. It is only when you pass a cluster of low shrubs that you see them, hoofprints several, pressed deep into the earth and pointing inland. Heracles crouches beside them, running a hand over the impressions with the same careful touch he might use to handle a ceremonial weapon. "They've been here," he says simply, as though that's the entirety of today's reward, and in truth, it is. There will be no capture this evening, no dramatic chase into the sunset. Just this knowledge, stored away like a seed in dry soil, waiting for the next day's work. As the sky turns the color of diluted wine, you both head back toward the village. Heracles walks in silence, the kind that does not require filling. The path is familiar now, each stone and bend already committed to memory. Back at the pasture, the cleared ground lies quietly under the fading light, the day's effort visible only in the absence of weeds and brambles. You lay down the bundle of branches where he points, and he nods in thanks before turning toward a nearby outbuilding where he'll sleep. There is no applause, no storytellers waiting with stylus and wax tablet to record the moment, just the soft hum of evening, the smell of dry earth cooling, and the small satisfaction of having been part of something that will never make it into the myths. It is the year 470 BC, early spring, and the air smells faintly of wet reeds. You are standing at the edge of the Lerner marsh, staring into a tangle of cattails, brackish pools, and low mist that clings stubbornly to the ground. Somewhere in this wet sprawl lives the Hydra, the many-headed serpent of legend, slayer of the unwary, bane of sailors and shepherds alike. In every story you've heard, the Hydra is a terrifying presence. Glowing eyes, hissing mouths, the kind of creature that demands a hero's full attention. But before any head-lopping can occur, there is the small matter of finding it, which, as Heracles points out in his matter-of-fact way, is essentially a long trudge through knee-deep mud. The marsh swallows sound, turning each splash of your sandal into a muffled thud. The air is still except for the lazy buzz of insects, and the mist shifts just enough to suggest movement where there is none. You step carefully, partly to avoid sinking too far, partly because the water has a way of hiding the shape of the ground. Heracles says little. Every so often, he pauses to study the waterline or a faint ripple in the reeds. His shoulders are relaxed, his gaze steady, as though this is no more remarkable than inspecting an irrigation ditch. The first hour passes without incident. No heads rear from the water, no monstrous hissing cuts the air. Instead, you notice small things: the faint, briny taste in the air, the pattern of frog calls echoing from somewhere deeper in the marsh, the way your feet leave pale trails of disturbed silt behind you. If this were a song sung in a banquet hall, this part would be skipped entirely. But here now it is the bulk of the experience: damp air, slow steps, and the soft, almost hypnotic pull of the marsh's stillness. The marsh, it turns out, has layers, not in the poetic sense but in the very real boot-sucking, occasionally sulphur-scented way. The further you follow Heracles, the more the ground changes texture underfoot, alternating between springy moss and treacherous sludge that clings as if it has been waiting centuries for this exact opportunity. Heracles moves steadily, pausing at intervals to check the lay of the reeds. When he stops, you stop. When he leans forward to study a faint swirl on the water's surface, you do the same, though mostly you see your own reflection and the occasional passing insect. The sounds of the village are far behind now. In their place comes a steady chorus of life that doesn't care about heroes or labors. Dragonflies skimming the water, the plunk of a turtle slipping into a pool, the constant shuffle of unseen creatures beneath the surface. Every so often, Heracles shifts the spear on his shoulder, not out of tension but habit. His breathing is slow, his stride unhurried, the kind of pace that makes you aware of every bead of sweat rolling down your back. The only vaguely dramatic moment comes when a heron bursts from a patch of reeds just ahead, its wings beating the air with heavy, deliberate strokes. Heracles doesn't flinch, neither do you, though that's more from the slow, trance-like rhythm of walking than from any actual bravery. Hours pass in this fashion. The Hydra remains entirely theoretical, much like the dramatic turning point in a storyteller's performance that hasn't yet arrived. For now it is simply you, Heracles, and the marsh, bound together in a shared silence broken only by the steady sound of water parting around your legs. By late afternoon, the mist has thinned enough that you can see the shape of the marsh in layers. A patchwork of still pools, knotted roots, and dark channels that seem to lead nowhere in particular. The sun sits low in the sky, casting long, fractured reflections across the water. The air is warmer now, heavy in that way that makes each breath feel slower, as though the marsh itself is pressing down on the pace of the day. Heracles has not once looked impatient. In fact, he appears content, almost meditative, stepping from one sodden patch to the next, as though time were a luxury he could afford to waste. You follow in his exact footprints, not out of superstition but because anywhere else is simply too soft. The mud takes your foot and holds it just a moment too long each time, as if considering whether to return it. You notice details you would have missed in a hurry: the faint silver gleam of minnows darting between reeds, the slow, deliberate ripple of a water snake skimming just beneath the surface, the cluster of pale, delicate flowers clinging stubbornly to a half-submerged log. There is no clash of steel here, no grand moment when the Hydra bursts forth from its lair in a storm of splashing water. Instead, there is only the gradual realization that most of heroism is this: moving steadily towards something that may or may not be exactly where the songs say it is, without the comfort of knowing when the day will end. As the light fades, Heracles stops at the edge of a slightly firmer patch of ground. He plants the butt of his spear into the mud and surveys the water ahead, his expression unreadable. After a long pause he simply says, "Tomorrow," and turns back the way you came. The walk back is slower still. Each step squelches, the sound muted under the blanket of dusk. The mist gathers again, the air cooling until every breath carries the faint scent of wet earth. By the time you reach the dry edge of the marsh, the first stars are faintly visible, scattered above like early watchfires. There is no triumph tonight, no crowd waiting with laurel crowns, only the quiet knowledge that the Hydra is out there somewhere, biding its time, and that you will return, because that is what heroes do, even when the songs forget to mention the hours spent in damp silence. The morning begins slowly, as most ancient mornings do. The light comes first, spilling over the stone hills in a soft gold that takes its time reaching the village. It moves like a guest who knows they're early, lingering just outside before making itself comfortable. The air is cool, heavy with the scent of olive wood smoke from fires that were kept alive all night. Somewhere nearby, a rooster announces the day, not once but repeatedly, as if the sun might forget to rise without a reminder. You are already awake, not because heroics demand early starts, but because sleeping on woven reed mats makes dawn feel less like a choice and more like an inevitability. Heracles, for his part, seems entirely unbothered by this. He sits cross-legged near the hearth, methodically eating figs and bread, his hands moving with the slow precision of someone who could win a foot race, but would rather finish breakfast first. Today's heroic work, you've been told, involves helping a local farmer move a stubbornly large stone from the edge of his field. This is not the sort of story that makes it into epic poetry, but in the reality of being an ancient Greek hero, far more days are spent hauling, mending, or retrieving things than slaying anything with multiple heads. The path to the field winds gently downhill, the dust rising with each step. Small yellow flowers push up between the rocks, their heads turned toward the sun in the single-minded way of plants. The air hums with the sound of bees, and occasionally the wind carries the faint tang of the sea, though it lies far beyond the hills. Heracles carries nothing yet. The tools will be fetched from the farmer. You, however, are already balancing a coiled rope over one shoulder, its rough fibers scratching against your tunic. The rope has no heroic quality to it. It is simply heavy enough to remind you of its presence, and that seems to be the general theme of the day: useful, solid, mildly inconvenient. The walk is unhurried. You pass a cluster of olive trees, their twisted trunks casting crooked shadows across the path. The shade is thin but enough to make you slow a little, letting the coolness linger before stepping back into the sun. Heracles says nothing, but the quiet is companionable, the kind of silence that belongs to people who understand that most work is not about speed, but about simply starting and continuing until it's done. Ahead you can see the faint outline of the farmer's hut, a dark smudge against the brightness of the field. Somewhere beyond that waits the stone, immovable only until someone bothers to move it. The farmer greets you the way people greet anyone arriving to do work they themselves would rather not, with a warmth that feels equal parts gratitude and relief. He is a wiry man, sun-browned, with lines on his face that suggest he has been squinting into this same light for decades. His tunic is patched, his sandals are dusty, and his handshake is firm enough to say, "Yes, you are here, and I am very glad it's you, not me, who will be lifting that thing." He leads you to the stone in question. It sits at the far edge of a tilled plot, half embedded in the soil, looking for all the world like it has been there since the gods laid out the land, and then promptly forgot about it. The farmer claims it is just in the wrong place, which is a polite way of saying it has been an obstacle for planting for far too many seasons. Heracles studies the stone the way some men study enemies, not with hostility, but with quiet, methodical assessment. He walks around it, prods the ground with his foot, tests its give with a hand on its rough surface. You stand a little to the side, the rope still heavy on your shoulder, waiting for the inevitable moment when he will say, "All right." When he does, it is not dramatic. He simply gestures for the rope, which you uncoil slowly, the loops falling to the earth with a muted thump. The air smells faintly of freshly turned soil, and the sharper tang of crushed weeds. Bees drift lazily between small wildflowers growing along the field's edge, indifferent to human struggles. The work begins without any grand announcement. The rope is looped, tightened, adjusted, and readjusted. Each movement is deliberate, as though the slowness itself will somehow make the stone lighter when the time comes. The sun edges higher, the light sharpening, and a soft breeze stirs the tops of the distant wheat. There is a certain peace in this, in knowing that the day's great task is not a matter of speed or victory, but simply of leverage, patience, and steady pressure. The farmer stands nearby, hands on hips, occasionally offering advice that is acknowledged but not followed. The stone for now remains unmoved. But there is no rush, there rarely is. The rope tightens with a soft creak as Heracles leans his weight into it, testing the stone's willingness to shift. The stone does not respond. It simply sits, as it has sat for perhaps hundreds of years, surrounded by soil that has grown used to its presence. You watch the way his shoulders adjust, not straining, but settling into the idea that this will be a conversation rather than a single push. The first movement is not a shift so much as a sigh, the faint crunch of earth loosening around the edges. Dust rises in a thin cloud, catching the sunlight in a lazy shimmer before drifting away. Heracles steps back, adjusts his grip, and leans again. You place your hands on the rope, adding your weight to the effort. It is not the sort of moment sung by poets, but the rhythm of pull, rest, and repositioning has its own quiet satisfaction. Minutes pass, then more. The stone, reluctant at first, begins to tilt ever so slightly, as though it has finally decided to humor you. Each movement is followed by a pause, not from exhaustion, but from the awareness that haste will only make the rope slip, or the ground collapse in the wrong place. The farmer, seeing progress, shifts from polite encouragement to small nods of approval, as if you are now confirming his belief that this was, in fact, a problem worth solving. The final inch of movement comes with no fanfare, just a steady pull, and the muffled thud of the stone, finding its new resting place beyond the edge of the field. There is no applause, no dramatic collapse into the dirt. Heracles straightens, brushes his hands against his tunic and nods once, task done. The farmer thanks you in the way men of the countryside do, with bread still warm from the hearth, a jug of water cool from the shade, and a place to sit that offers a view of the now clear field. The work is over, but the slowness of the morning lingers, stretching into the afternoon as though time itself approves of the unhurried pace. You might imagine that being a hero means endless battles, thunderous applause, and the occasional divine gift. In truth, most days look remarkably like stretching, and not the dramatic warrior's lunge kind. More the sort of stretches that someone might do when they are trying to delay starting actual work. It is early. The sort of early when the air still holds the memory of the night's coolness. You and Heracles are by a small stream that murmurs lazily over smooth stones, its surface catching the light of a sun that has only just risen. The sky is pale and clear, a clean slate waiting for the day to write something on it. You suspect it will write more lifting, but for now, things are calm. Heracles begins with slow rotations of his shoulders, each accompanied by a faint sound that might be joints realigning, or simply the leather of his harness creaking. His arms extend, then bend, then extend again. The kind of movement that looks casual but has clearly been repeated so often it is now part of muscle memory. You follow along, your own limbs protesting in small, quiet ways, as though they know perfectly well this is only the prelude to something heavier. The stream provides a background rhythm: splash, ripple, pause, and the occasional bird call drops into the stillness, like a polite announcement. Somewhere in the distance, a farmer is calling to his oxen, his voice carrying in the cool morning air. Heracles seems in no hurry to move on. This is part of the routine, he explains. A day's work should begin at a pace that allows the body to remember itself. You try to adopt the same attitude, though it is hard not to glance at the pile of stones nearby, clearly waiting to be relocated for reasons that will likely feel less convincing when you are halfway through the task. But for now, it is enough to feel the stretch in your back, the pull in your legs, and the small comfort of moving in sync with someone who has clearly been through this countless times. When the stretching ends, or rather fades into something that could no longer be honestly described as stretching, Heracles begins what he calls conditioning. You have learned to interpret this word loosely. It might mean hauling a cart of olive jars up a hill. It might mean dragging a fallen tree from one side of a grove to the other, for reasons that no one fully explains. Today it appears to mean lifting stones from the stream bank and placing them in a neat line along the path. Not a wall, not a foundation, just a line. A line that, for all you can tell, exists only to be a line. The stones are irregular, some the size of your head, others no larger than a loaf of bread, all smoothed by years of water and silt. Heracles chooses them with the calm deliberation of a man selecting fruit at the market. He crouches, studies a stone from several angles, then lifts it with a movement that is not fast but unarguably certain. You imitate his method, though your selection process is less about assessing shape, and more about wondering which one looks least likely to roll out of your grip mid-lift. The path is soft underfoot, bordered by wild thyme that releases a faint herbal scent each time your sandals brush against it. Bees are at work here too, steady, unhurried, unconcerned with the slow progress of two men and their carefully relocated stones. It is not back-breaking work, though your shoulders begin to feel the weight after the 10th or 12th trip. There is a rhythm to it: crouch, lift, step, place, return, that becomes almost meditative. Heracles says little, except to occasionally note that your back should be straighter, or that your grip will tire faster if you hold the stone like that. His voice is low and even, as though instruction should never disturb the calm of the morning. You find yourself measuring time less by the position of the sun, and more by the changing sound of the stream. From this angle its gurgle is softer, filtered through reeds and small rushes. From the other side of the path, it is louder, splashing over a shallow dip. Each trip offers a slightly different version of the same view: sun glancing off water, dust puffing from your sandals, the smell of earth warming in the light. Somewhere after what must be your 20th trip, you begin to realize the line of stones now snakes halfway along the path. It serves no obvious purpose, but it is neat, tidy, and perhaps complete in its own quiet way. Heracles nods at it once, which you have come to understand as his version of declaring something done. When the last stone is placed, there is no great declaration of success. Heracles simply straightens, rolls his shoulders once, and begins walking toward a patch of shade beneath an olive tree. You follow, your arms pleasantly tired, and your tunic sticking in a few places where the fabric has caught the morning's sweat. The air is warmer now, but not yet heavy. The kind of warmth that hints it will become much more persuasive by midday. Beneath the olive tree, Heracles lowers himself to the ground with a slow exhale, stretching his legs out in front of him. He gestures for you to do the same, and you sink into the grass, which is cool and uneven, dotted with tiny flowers that bend lazily in the breeze. This, he informs you, is cooling down. You suspect the term is more aspirational than strictly necessary, but you go along with it. The cool down consists of sitting, sipping from a shared clay flask of water, and occasionally leaning to one side or the other to stretch a muscle. Heracles explains, in a tone that suggests he has said this many times, that recovery is as important as effort. A hero who does not rest will find his strength leaving him at the wrong moment. You nod, as if storing away this wisdom, though the truth is you are mostly watching a small line of ants navigate the roots of the olive tree, with remarkable precision. There is little conversation. The sound of the stream drifts to you in soft fragments. Birds move through the branches above, their wings making the faintest stir in the leaves. The smell of thyme still lingers from the path, mingling now with the dry, faintly peppery scent of olive wood. Time stretches in a way that has nothing to do with the sun's position, each minute unfolding at the same slow pace as your breathing. By the time Heracles decides the cool-down is sufficient, the sun has climbed high enough to cast shorter shadows. You stand, brush the grass from your tunic, and realize that, for all the talk of training, you feel more as though you've spent the morning in some odd blend of gentle exercise and unhurried contemplation. It is perhaps the truest kind of hero's work, being willing to carry heavy things slowly, in the company of someone who knows there is no need to rush. It is somewhere around 1250 BC, give or take a decade. Exact dates being tricky when you live in an era that measures time in harvests and temple dedications rather than tidy calendar pages. The morning has begun in the way mornings often do here. The smell of damp reeds from the nearby marsh, the buzz of insects just beginning their day's shift, and the distant sound of a fisherman grumbling to his net. You are here because Heracles has agreed, with that maddeningly casual tone, to deal with a little creature problem in the area. Word around the village is that the creature in question is a many-headed monster of unimaginable ferocity, lurking in the waters and devouring livestock, fishermen, and, according to one particularly nervous farmer, the occasional unattended sandal. You are less certain. So far the lair looks like a particularly swampy stretch of riverbank, where the mud swallows your sandals halfway to the ankle, and reeds slap your tunic with damp indifference. Heracles moves ahead steadily, swatting at flies without any sign of heroic urgency. It is quiet here, but not the dangerous sort of quiet, more the quiet of a place where most sensible creatures have gone somewhere drier. You notice the water's surface dimple with fish movement, the lazy flick of a turtle slipping under, and the slow curl of mist rising, where the sun hits the cooler water. If this is the home of a terrifying hydra, it is also home to a great many frogs, judging by the chorus rising from the shallows. Heracles, for his part, says nothing about multiple heads, sharp teeth, or anything else that might justify the stories. He simply points to a patch of denser reeds and mutters something about disturbances. You can't help but think the disturbance could just as easily be a particularly fat eel. It's a thought you keep to yourself, for now. You move toward the dense stand of reeds with the deliberate pace of someone who knows there's mud underfoot, and possibly something unpleasant lurking in it, though unpleasant could cover a wide range, from snapping turtles to the sensation of your sandal being sucked clean off your foot. Heracles leads, wading without hesitation. His legs, unsurprisingly, are less concerned with the mud's stubborn grip. Yours, however, are engaged in an ongoing negotiation with every step. Lift, squelch, free, repeat. Somewhere in the distance, a heron lets out a single, unhelpfully ominous cry, before taking flight. The reeds rustle, not violently, just in that way reeds tend to when the breeze moves through them in uneven bursts. Heracles raises a hand, not as a dramatic signal for silence, but more as a casual reminder that some amount of listening might be useful. You stop, tilt your head, and hear, well, mostly frogs. Possibly a fish jump. Maybe, if you're generous, the faint slither of something moving through shallower water. The air here is heavy, not yet hot, but thick, with the scent of waterlogged plants, and that faint metallic tang riverbanks always seem to carry. Insects trace lazy spirals around your face, occasionally making brief, unwanted contact. Somewhere behind you a small bubble rises in the water and pops with a sound so small it feels almost rude to notice it. Heracles steps closer to the reeds and parts them gently with one hand. You lean in, expecting perhaps the glint of scales, a hiss, or, if the stories are to be believed, the sight of multiple reptilian heads weaving in perfect menace. Instead you see ripples. Small ones. The sort of ripples that could come from a large fish. Or perhaps, a very unimpressed amphibian. The reeds sway again, more sharply this time. A shape passes beneath the surface. Elongated, sinuous. You catch a glimpse of something dark and mottled, maybe as long as your arm, not exactly a creature from epic poetry. Heracles watches it with mild interest. There it is, he says, as though pointing out a slightly above-average goat. His tone does not carry the weight of someone about to engage in a desperate battle for survival. You are beginning to suspect this hydra may not be the headline-worthy monster the storytellers made it out to be. The mottled shape drifts closer, disturbing the surface with the kind of deliberate laziness only creatures that have never heard of human drama can manage. Heracles crouches, watching, then reaches down with a speed that suggests he's done this before. There's a splash, a swirl of mud, and when his hand comes back up, it's holding the beast aloft for your inspection. The hydra, in the cold light of reality, is a very large eel, long, muscular, glistening with a sheen of river water, and looking more annoyed than monstrous. Its mouth opens in a silent protest before snapping shut again. You can almost hear the collective sigh of every bard who will now have to embellish this sight into something worthy of a hero's song. Heracles turns the eel slightly, studying it as if checking for anything out of the ordinary. Healthy specimen, he remarks, before adding with a faint smirk, one head. As you can see. You can indeed see. There is absolutely no chance of mistaking this for a multi-headed swamp terror, unless you were very far away, in very bad light, and already committed to telling a dramatic story. Heracles walks a few steps to the shallows and releases the eel back into the water. It vanishes in an instant, leaving only a widening circle of ripples behind. And just like that, the battle is over. No clashing of weapons, no desperate struggle, only a quick grab, a moment of inspection, and a release. The rest of the morning is spent in mild conversation as you both head back toward drier ground. Heracles talks about how most monsters, once you get close enough, turn out to be far less monstrous than their reputations suggest. You nod, letting the lesson settle in, though you suspect it will not make the bard's version of events. By the time the village comes into view, you already know how the story will be told. A ferocious hydra, many heads writhing in the marsh, brought low by Heracles with one decisive move. And you also know the truth will be much quieter, and much slipperier. It is a comfortably warm afternoon in the year 200 BC, and you find yourself in Knossos. Not the tourist-friendly Knossos of postcards, but the actual working palace complex. The air carries the mingled scents of olive oil, drying clay, and the faint tang of sea breeze drifting in from the north coast. Somewhere nearby, a mason taps rhythmically at a stone block, and you hear the slap-slap of sandals along a corridor paved with smooth slabs. Theseus has arrived with the kind of swagger that comes from knowing your name will be remembered, even if the details are fuzzy. The locals have been speaking in hushed, nervous tones about the labyrinth, a monstrous architectural puzzle designed to trap the unwary forever, and currently home to a dangerous beast. The danger level depends on who you ask. Some say it's a savage bull-headed man. Others mutter about a huge and exceptionally bad-tempered cow. You are here to see it for yourself. The approach to this so-called labyrinth is far less dramatic than the stories imply. It's a narrow stone stairwell tucked discreetly between storerooms, the kind of place you might expect to lead to a pantry or, at most, a wine cellar. Theseus pauses before descending, either to collect his heroic resolve or to get used to the dim light. It's hard to tell. Down you go, step by slow step, until the sunlight is reduced to a thin ribbon spilling down from above. The air is cooler here, with that faint earthy dampness that all underground spaces seem to share. You pass by stacked amphorae, baskets of grain, and a suspiciously large number of broom handles, leaning against the wall. So far, this labyrinth is looking less like a maze of inescapable complexity, and more like a slightly disorganized basement. You follow Theseus deeper into the passage, the sound of your footsteps muffled by the dust-softened stone. The labyrinth reveals itself one turn at a time, though each turn is suspiciously predictable, usually leading to yet another low-ceiling chamber lined with shelves. The shelves are fascinating if your definition of fascinating includes baskets of lentils, jars of olives suspended in brine, and neatly coiled ropes that look like they've been waiting decades to be useful. Some of the jars are sealed with wax and stamped with the palace crest. Others look as though they might contain something better left uninvestigated. A corridor branches off to the left, then curves around only to rejoin the main path 20 paces later, which is either poor design or someone's idea of a joke. The walls are close enough to trail your fingertips along the stone, which is cool, slightly gritty, and occasionally interrupted by patches of faint whitewash clinging stubbornly to the surface. Every so often, a narrow slit high on the wall lets in a pale shaft of daylight. Not the ominous shadowy lighting of myth, but the kind of light that makes you think about dust motes more than danger. Somewhere above, faint footsteps suggest that life in the palace is going on, completely unaware that heroic deeds are supposedly unfolding beneath their feet. Theseus moves with the calm assurance of a man who has been in plenty of basements before. He doesn't seem particularly concerned about getting lost, nor does he appear to be expecting a violent confrontation. At one point he pauses to inspect a stack of clay bowls, tapping one lightly with his knuckle, and nodding, as though confirming its quality. So far, the only real challenge is resisting the urge to reorganize the storerooms as you pass through them. The corridor narrows again, the air turning just a fraction warmer, as though you've moved closer to some enclosed source of life. You hear it before you see it. A low, steady huffing sound, punctuated by the occasional shuffle of hooves on stone. Theseus slows, tilting his head, then steps around the final corner, and there it is, the Minotaur. Not the man-eating, half-human terror of legend, not even the snorting bull of nightmares. Instead, you find yourself looking at a very large, very well-fed bull, tethered to a sturdy wooden post in the center of what appears to be a generously sized storeroom. The floor is layered with straw, and a wide clay basin holds water at one end. In the dim light, the bull's reddish hide glows faintly, its horns polished to a dull sheen. It regards you with mild curiosity, chewing in slow, unhurried motions that make it clear your arrival is not exactly a surprise. Theseus steps forward, pats the bull's flank, and murmurs something that sounds suspiciously like "good boy." You notice that the room contains no bones, no grisly remains, and certainly no evidence of previous battles. Just the smell of hay, the soft shifting of the animal's weight, and the faint creak of the rope as it sways gently with his movement. "This," Theseus says at last, "is what they mean by keeping the beast in the labyrinth." His tone is somewhere between amusement and resignation. It's more of a storage solution than a prison. He takes a moment to top up the bull's water before turning to leave, and you follow him back toward the stairs. As the daylight from the upper floors grows brighter, you already know that the story will not survive in this form. No, by the time the poets are done with it, this tame bull will be a raging hybrid monster in an endless twisting maze. The truth quietly stored away like one more jar in a dusty basement. It is the year 180 BC, and the Aegean Sea is stretching itself awake under the pale gold of early morning. The surface is calm, broken only by the slow, deliberate swells that nudge the black-painted hull of Odysseus' ship. The air is rich with the mingled smells of salt, pitch, and the faintly sour aroma of damp rope. Odysseus stands at the prow, squinting toward the horizon, where the water meets a low rise of rocky coastline. This, he has been told, is the domain of the sirens, those dangerous, alluring singers who lure sailors to their doom. The crew is not especially convinced. They've been at sea for weeks now, and the most threatening thing they've encountered has been a particularly aggressive gull. Still, Odysseus insists on the famous precautions: wax in every man's ears, and himself lashed to the mast, so he can hear the sirens, without steering the ship toward them. The crew obeys with the weary patience of men who have already accepted that their leader has a taste for the dramatic. One man shapes the wax between his fingers, rolling it into thick plugs before pressing it into place. Another tugs on the ropes that will secure Odysseus to the mast, testing the knots with a small frown. The island draws nearer. Its shoreline is unremarkable. A few weathered rocks, some scrubby bushes clinging stubbornly to the soil, and a scattering of seabirds lifting lazily into the sky. The water is shallow here, the waves breaking gently against the stones, with a sound that's more soothing than threatening. No voices yet. Just the creak of the ship, the slap of water against its hull, and the rhythmic flapping of a loose sail. Somewhere behind you one of the sailors yawns. The ship drifts a little closer to the island, carried more by the steady push of the current than by any great effort of the oars. The men row in a slow, almost lazy rhythm, their movements in perfect time with the creaking of the long wooden benches. The air smells sharper here, the tang of seaweed rising from the rocks ahead. You catch sight of shallow tidal pools glinting in the sunlight, their still surfaces briefly reflecting the ship before a small wave spills over the edges. Odysseus cranes his neck, straining to hear. His knuckles are white where they grip the ropes, and for all his heroic reputation, there is something faintly absurd about the way he leans forward, as though the sirens might be hiding just beyond the curve of the shore. Then faintly a sound does reach you. It's high and reedy, wavering in pitch. You wait for it to swell into the kind of irresistible melody the poets promised, but instead it falters, cuts off, and starts again in an entirely different key. Another joins it, this one lower, scratchier, and delivered with what you can only describe as uncertain confidence. The combined effect is not exactly enchanting. More like two musicians in different rooms attempting to play the same song from memory, while one of them is also sneezing. The wax-stuffed sailors row on, oblivious to the performance. Odysseus, however, looks torn between fascination and disappointment. The way his eyebrows draw together suggests that he is beginning to suspect the fatal beauty of Siren's song has been wildly overstated. The sounds continue, drifting in and out on the sea breeze. At one point you're fairly certain you hear a lyric about fish. The shoreline is close enough now that you can see the water swirling gently around jagged stones just below the surface. The song is louder here, though still plagued by that odd, inconsistent pitch. Every now and then one of the voices simply stops, replaced by the faint sound of someone coughing. Odysseus' eyes are fixed on the rocks ahead. You follow his gaze and finally spot the source of the music. 3 figures sit on a sun-warmed ledge, their bare feet dangling over the edge above the tide. But these are no sleek, otherworldly creatures with flowing hair and shimmering tails. Instead, they are women of a certain age, bundled in faded linen shawls against the sea breeze. One has a lap full of shells she's rhythmically knocking together like makeshift percussion. Another clutches what might once have been a lyre, its frame patched with driftwood, its strings mismatched and clearly overdue for tuning. The third, the lead singer apparently, cups her hands around her mouth to project her voice across the waves, the effort making her face flush pink. They sing with gusto, if not with harmony, their expressions bright and earnest as they watch the ship pass. Every so often they pause to sip from small clay cups, then resume with renewed determination. There's no sign of a trap, no ominous hint of danger. Just 3 islanders enthusiastically working through what sounds like a local folk tune about the seasonal arrival of mackerel. Odysseus' expression softens into something that might be reluctant admiration. For all their lack of technique, the sirens are at least committed to their craft. You suspect that by the time this story is retold, they'll have gained better voices, dangerous allure, and perhaps a few convenient fatalities to liven up the telling. For now, though, the ship sails on, and their song fades into the distance, leaving behind only the steady rhythm of the oars, and the faint memory of a melody you can't quite remember, and probably don't need to. It is around 180 BC, the tail end of a war that has dragged on for so long even the poets are starting to sound bored. The morning sun spills over the walls of Troy, painting the stone a soft, honeyed gold. From a distance, the city looks calm, a sweep of rooftops, the faint glint of bronze here and there. But inside, the streets are quiet in that post-siege way that comes from running out of both supplies and enthusiasm. The Greek encampment outside the walls is strangely empty. A few faint trails of smoke drift upward from abandoned fire pits, and the trampled earth bears the prints of countless sandaled feet that are no longer there. The silence is punctuated only by the occasional flap of canvas from a tent left standing. And in the middle of it all sits the horse. It is big, certainly. Impressive, even. Its flanks are broad, its head raised in a noble, slightly smug angle. But the wood is plain pine, the grain unpolished and still smelling faintly of resin. The hooves are blocky and square, clearly the work of men in a hurry, and one of the ears appears to be attached at a slightly wrong angle, giving the whole animal a mildly puzzled look. The Trojans gather at a safe distance, heads tilted. There are murmurs. No one is quite sure why the Greeks would leave such a large wooden animal behind, nor why it's positioned so prominently. Theories range from a gift to the gods, to a failed art project they didn't want to take home. From the walls, the thing doesn't look especially dangerous. It's just there. The Trojans do not rush to a decision. That would be reckless. Instead, they form a loose circle in the dust outside the gates, shuffling from foot to foot while keeping a wary distance from the wooden horse, as though it might suddenly come to life and trot away. Someone suggests burning it immediately, but the idea is quickly dismissed. Not for any tactical reason, but because firewood has been scarce for months and no one wants to waste such a large supply on mere spectacle. Another proposes dismantling it for timber. A carpenter eyes the sturdy beams along its flank, calculating how many roofs they could repair, how many carts they could build. But this too meets resistance. It could be cursed, someone mutters, glancing toward the citadel as if the gods themselves might overhear and take offense. A priest steps forward, robe swaying, and clears his throat in the sort of way that signals a long speech ahead. He delivers an extended treatise on omens, divine favor, and the general wisdom of accepting large, inexplicable gifts, without asking too many questions. This takes the better part of an hour, and involves several detours into the history of other ceremonial objects nobody present has ever heard of. Meanwhile, children wander closer to the horse, daring one another to touch its legs. The youngest manages a quick tap on the hoof, before bolting back to safety, squealing with triumph. The sun climbs higher, the debate continues. The horse, entirely silent, remains exactly where it is, smelling faintly of sap, and, if you stand close enough, of the sea. By the time the Trojans settle on a plan, the light has softened toward afternoon, and a warm breeze has started to carry the faint smell of baking bread from somewhere inside the city. The priest has finished his second speech of the day, and the carpenter has drawn several diagrams in the dust, illustrating how the horse might be maneuvered through the gate without taking off its ears. The final decision is not made out of strategy or divine guidance, but because someone finally points out that leaving the horse outside overnight will mean keeping extra guards on watch, and frankly no one has the energy for that. And so, a crew of men is gathered, ropes are fetched, and the process of hauling begins. The horse proves heavier than expected. Its belly, though hollow, is reinforced with thick planks, and the wheels beneath its feet, clearly not built for smooth rolling, make a loud protesting squeak with each turn. Progress is slow. At one point they have to stop entirely to adjust the ropes, which keep slipping. Another pause is required when a curious goat ambles into the path, utterly unfazed by shouts and arm-waving. Inside the city, word spreads. People lean out of upper windows to watch, calling down bits of advice that are mostly ignored. Children run alongside, darting ahead to open space for the procession. The horse moves a few feet at a time, looming awkwardly over the crowd, until at last it passes through the gates with inches to spare. Once inside, it's wheeled toward the main square, where it's parked without ceremony beside a row of market stalls. The Trojans stand back, breathing heavily, hands on hips. No one is quite sure what to do next. The horse, for its part, remains perfectly still, its mismatched ears pointed forward as if it's politely waiting for someone to say something. In the days following its arrival, the Trojan horse becomes furniture. It stands in the square like a mildly inconvenient statue, casting an elongated shadow across the market stalls in the morning, and smelling faintly of warm pine in the heat of the afternoon. Merchants quickly learn to position their tables, so that its legs form a windbreak. A fish seller claims the shaded space under its belly, delighted to have a cool spot for his baskets. By midweek, someone has draped a length of linen over the horse's back to dry, and a pair of pigeons has made a tentative start on a nest in one of its ears. The wheels creak faintly when the wind shifts, but otherwise it is silent, its gaze fixed somewhere beyond the rooftops, as though contemplating the deep philosophical meaning of being ignored. Children treat it as part of the city landscape. They play games weaving between its legs, chalking little designs on its wooden hooves. An enterprising teenager hangs a clay wind chime from its jaw, which tinkles gently in the breeze. Every so often a passerby pauses to run a hand over the smooth planks, noting the craftsmanship, or lack thereof, but no one finds it threatening. If anything, the general opinion is that it's oddly comforting to have it there, a solid presence in a city that has spent years under siege. Life in Troy resumes its slow rhythm. The horse remains. It starts small, a single amphora of olives, left leaning against one of the horse's hind legs for safekeeping, while its owner steps away. Then, a bundle of firewood, tucked neatly between two of its wheels. By the end of the week, there's an informal system in place. If you need to store something in the square, you just pop it in the horse. The hollow belly, so carefully constructed for its secret purpose, turns out to be the perfect dry space for sacks of grain. Someone rolls a barrel of salted fish inside. A potter leaves a stack of unglazed bowls in one corner, where they won't be knocked over by careless elbows in the marketplace. Over time, the arrangement acquires an unspoken etiquette. Large items go toward the back, perishables near the front. If you borrow someone else's rope from the pile in the left corner, you return it, preferably in better condition. And above all, no climbing the ladder into the head unless you've been invited. Apparently, it's been claimed as a private seating spot by two elderly men who spend their afternoons up there discussing politics and the price of figs. The smell inside the horse evolves. At first, it's simply wood and sea salt. Later, it becomes a layered blend of dried herbs, wool, and faintly fermented grain, with a lingering undertone of pine sap. Some find it pleasant. Others avoid standing too close. Still, no one questions its usefulness. The siege is over, the markets are full, and the horse, once a symbol of foreign mystery, is now just another piece of Troy's civic life. The evening it happens begins like any other. The marketplace closes in its slow, ambling way. The last of the day's bread is sold. The fish stall is swept clean, and the amphora of olives, perpetually half empty, is tucked once more into its usual place beside the horse's leg. A mild breeze slides in from the sea, carrying the faint scent of salt and wood smoke. The square grows quiet, lit only by a scatter of oil lamps glowing in doorways. The horse stands in its usual spot, tall and motionless, a shadowy outline against the dimming sky. The guard posted nearby is half listening to the soft creak of the wheels in the wind, when he notices a faint, unfamiliar sound. It's not loud, just the slow, deliberate shift of weight against wooden planks. He glances over, sees nothing unusual, and shrugs it off. Perhaps a pigeon inside, or the rope pile settling. But inside the horse, in the cool, grain-scented dark, men are awake. They have been awake for hours, silent and still, listening to the heartbeat of the city around them. Muscles stiff from confinement, they wait for the signal. The brief flare of firelight from beyond the walls, barely visible through the narrow slats. When it comes, they move with care. A panel is eased open, letting in a slice of night air. One man slips through, then another, feet soft on the packed earth. The square remains quiet. The guard, still drowsy, hears nothing this time. Within the hour, Troy will not be the same. And so, the tale of ancient Greek heroics, or perhaps more accurately ancient Greek misadventures, drifts to a quiet close. You have wandered through dusty streets and sun-warmed fields, watched men in bronze armor puff their way up hillsides, and seen great wooden monuments serve mostly as pigeon roosts and storage sheds. You have stood beside heroes whose sandals pinched, whose armor never quite sat right, and whose glorious destinies were sometimes more paperwork than poetry. The age of gods and legends always sounds more glamorous in the telling than in the living. The heroes, for all their epic moments, still woke up with sore backs, still got splinters, still squinted into the sun and wished they'd remembered their cloak. The poets rarely wrote about the smell of an unwashed tunic after a week on campaign, or the way a helmet strap rubbed your chin raw. But you've seen it here, all the little bits they left out. And now, with the city of Troy fading into the night behind you, the echoes of battle muffled by distance and time, you can let the weight of the spear, the shield, the sandals and the dust fall away. The clamor of markets and marching feet is replaced by a softer sound, the low hum of a warm evening, the easy hush of a world settling into rest. The air is still, the horizon dark and steady. You breathe in slowly, as the last hints of wood smoke and olive oil slip into the cool air. In the calm beyond the myth, there is no rush, no siege, no gods watching from the clouds. Only the gentle pace of your own breathing, the weight of your body sinking into stillness, and the slow, certain drift toward sleep. The heroes have had their turn. Now it is yours.